So this is the slide that they gave me. It's almost as pretty as the environmental one.
Pretty.
No, it's scary. It's staring you right in the face. You see this armor. I don't know if this really corresponds to state power. Anyway, this is supposed to be our day in which we do the anthropology of the state. And if I say to you, especially as undergraduates, let's say you were an intro to anthropology. Again. And I said, we're going to do the anthropology of the state. What do you immediately say to me?
How do you define a state? What state?
What state? Actually, I like that the best. What state? I always get that one, actually. Whenever I'm like, of the state, somebody's like, well, Connecticut.
Leave Connecticut out of it.
New York. Yeah, what state? That is so true, because in our world, it's the state. When we say it's the state, it always means some state. And in other countries, usually they understand better that this should mean the big national government, right? The government. That's what anthropology means by anthropology of the state. So that's the first thing that comes to your mind is what state. But there's another thing that should come to your mind. You're sitting there in this anthropology class, and the professor gets up there and says, we're going to study the anthropology of government and politics. What's your response?
Are we in a poli sci?
Are we in a poli-sci class? Exactly. Your first response is, what? What am I doing here? No, wait a second. This isn't what anthropology should be doing. We shouldn't be doing the anthropology of the state. And they're not entirely we're not entirely wrong, because traditionally anthropology spent most of its time studying the not state, or places where if there was a state, we didn't want to be there because we figured it wasn't interesting. And so we wanted to be that we left those to the political scientists, all the places that had states and governments, we left those to other people. So one of the most commonly cited definitions of the state comes to us from Max Weber. They gave me this sentence too, is that the government or the state is a place, is an entity that successfully claims a monopoly over the legitimate use of force or physical violence within a given territory. Let us say that you put on that armor that I had there, and then you came up to me and you were like, well, I don't want to do the final. And like you punched me. What am I supposed to do?
Report.
Who? Who do I report to? Yes, I am supposed to call the police.
Who?
I am not supposed to, unless you keep punching me, in which case I can punch back.
Oh.
But you're right, you're not, if I only get punched once, maybe I'll get one punch back. But if I can't then just pummel you, that would be wrong. Then I'm supposed to call in the police, because they're the ones who are supposed to do the legitimate use of violence. Right? Now, we can question whether this is true, but in this case, this is just Weber's definition. Places where there was a bureaucracy that you go to the law, like that picture with these columns, that's what PowerPoint said it should be. Prisons, a military. So anthropologists were supposed to be in places where these things were not around, and where people organize themselves without having necessarily a written codified legal system, or being able to imprison people, or have this defined hierarchy. However, especially in recent years, we would say that understanding the power of the state is hugely important for anthropology to try and figure out. Because in fact, the people that were supposed to be doing it, the political scientists, well, how are they doing? I don't have anything against individual political scientists, but since 2016, if you're trying to tell me that you political scientists can tell me why Trump was elected, it doesn't make any sense. There's no science behind that. You guys, your whole field, anyway. we need to understand this from an anthropological perspective because we're the ones that can understand nutty stuff like that. We also need to understand the thing that probably the anthropologists didn't do very well back in the day is to understand those places that look like they didn't have a state, the not state societies, were always probably in relation to states. And that occurred in the pre-colonial times. We know that happened during the colonization of some of these places, but even in pre-colonial times, there were states around in some of these places, like the Inca or the Aztec, that pushed other people into the margins. Even those people we call hunter-gatherers or people who were supposedly on the margins of society were often formed in relationship to state societies. Now, the person that I most associate with the anthropology of state, because I took a class with Dr. Katherine Verdery.
Did you really?
I did a couple classes. She is an extremely thoughtful professor. No, I'm thinking about it. I was a TA for one of her classes too, but I was so bad. I'm surprised I'm even here now that I think back on it. Oh boy. Anyway. Yeah, she was is a very insightful person. She taught a class called The Anthropology of the State. Fortunately, Dr. Verdery was there to tell us about these things. And what Verdery claims in this section is that actually it is only ethnography can tell us about the state, or you might say only anthropology can tell us about the state. Because other disciplines, like maybe political science, are either they're too far away from what's happening on the ground, so they're only studying people in the elites or those places, or they don't question their own biases, like anthropologists are always doing, and to the extent that we're doing it so much that it probably makes you mad. If you're taking 5 anthropology classes, you get mad at how much you're always questioning things. And they're just full of questions, no answers, just questions. So she says that anthropology is really going to be the ones that are able to understand state power because we go in and get into the local scene and we're always questioning our disciplinary foundations. And so the problem with these other disciplines is that they do something that James Scott, in this kind of pretty famous book, he had a way with words. He always comes up with these great phrases, which then get taken into place. So his book was called Seeing Like a State, which is the idea that they're not, people are trying to see things from this overarching vantage point and aren't actually seeing things on the ground. And so in Scott's idea, this was the reason why people trying to improve the human condition from above have failed. And so Verdery says that these other disciplines like the political scientists, well, I'm really getting down on them today. They really didn't understand that when socialism collapsed, they were all surprised. When the Soviet Union dissolved, they couldn't get it. And the reason they couldn't get it is because they were too far away from the local scene. Now, Verdery had done ethnographic fieldwork in Romania from before socialism collapsed. So she claimed in this article that the party, Communist Party of Romania, the party's central control was always weaker than it pretended to be. So that's what she was saying before in her ethnographic work, that there is this projection of power from the central office, but it wasn't really as strong as it pretended to be. And then in the post-socialist period, what comes next, they were trying to decollectivize these farms and return them into private ownership. Yeah, no, it's the mayors. That's the title of this article, right? Seeing like a mayor, which apparently is not a good thing. And so what she says is that the reason this land privatization didn't work out was because of these local mayors who are just like, nah, I'll take this land and then I'm going to build my villa. And there's really nothing that they can do about it from either the central government, from the local government, even though it pisses everybody off and probably is illegal. And so what she's arguing against is the idea that somehow it was the central power that was slowing this down. The central power was at fault here. She says that they might have wanted to slow it down, but they wouldn't have had that power even if they wanted to. So this leads to a larger point that she's making about what is called totalitarian power. And I don't want to underplay the role of totalitarian power in a totalitarian state. I don't want to live in a totalitarian state. So that's how we portray it. Verdery says that, in fact, right, that some of them may be weaker than we think. They project this idea of power, right? But just like the Romanian central government projected this idea of power, there might be some relative weakness. And she asks, is this further evidence of the problems inherent in research methods that overemphasize the view from the top? So the idea that from the state or the top down is going to control things. Dr. Verdery is an astute observer and was one of the pioneers of how to do an ethnography or an anthropology of a state society and to understand central power, but in relationship to what was going on in the local scene. So really kind of pioneering it. Kind of related to another pioneer that everybody loves, Pierre Bourdieu. I like Bourdieu. I have to say, I like Bourdieu. And so I was excited to start reading this article, but as soon as I started reading it, some other emotion hit me, which was, Bourdieu. It's so hard. I didn't really understand why they included this. So I tried to make sense of it for myself, in the sense that what I think Bourdieu is about, but it doesn't come out as much in this selection. Or I think one of the things Bourdieu is probably, he's not as famous as Foucault over in France, but like Foucault, he's often been probably badly translated and just confusing because of the French. Bourdieu's central issue is trying to figure out how people are acting, are struggling, are engaged in everyday activities, but nevertheless reproduce the systemic hierarchies. So actually people read Bourdieu, for example, in education classes because he has a kind of very interesting critique of how, yeah, people are trying to use education to move upwards in life, right? We all want a little social mobility. We don't want to stay down. That's why we're here, right? But in some ways, what he's saying is the educational system also basically keeps people in line and continues their class hierarchy. So he's trying to figure out how it is that people are striving and struggling and doing and taking actions, but nevertheless results in a reproduction of the overall system. Or why do people vote and act in ways that preserves this hierarchy? Why is it that the places that seem the worst off seem to sometimes at least vote for people who are not going to help, are going to basically continue the system as it is? Again, I don't want to be too down on the political scientists, but they don't always seem to be able to explain voting patterns like this. So Bourdieu says here that what is critical are these symbolic practices, the symbolic power of this. And he's arguing against two different groups of people. One, he's arguing against the people that say that symbolics are the symbols and these things, they don't matter because that's just the class system. That's just power. And so this would be your crude Marxist interpretation, as it doesn't matter who's doing the knowledge production, you might say, because all that matters is the raw power of social class. So he's trying to navigate between those people, but he doesn't want to also fall into the other extreme, which is this idea that the symbolic field is in its own world, which is separated entirely from the regular everyday social order. Oftentimes when you go into an art history class, it's like you get totally absorbed in the paintings, and it's as if they don't have any relationship to society. They're talking to themselves. And so what he's trying to do is tell us how what he's talking about in this article, if we can understand it, is how capital, money, you might say, real capital, Bitcoin, turns into symbolic capital, or what some people call, or what Bourdieu and other places called cultural capital. So that in some ways, what he was talking about is how having dominance is not just raw power, you might say, and raw capital and having money, but how that translated into knowing how to navigate the world. And that's why he says the education system ends up reproducing this hierarchy, is because what do you learn how to do in higher education? You don't just learn stuff, you learn how to be in the world. You learn what you should do if you're invited to a dinner party. Which class did you learn that? No, you just learn it from being around people in social class, and they tell you to sit in the front row, and so you sit in the front row, and they tell you to do this, and they tell you to do that, and then you find your social class mate there, who might then become your spouse later on, and then it's like, because our colleges are totally sorted almost by social class, almost completely. Let's think about this. So, how do we find each other in this United States of America, right? There's the idea that we find our mates because of romantic love. We don't arrange marriages. We don't prohibit anybody from getting married to anybody. We don't, well, we did have laws about that, but let's just say we don't now. Let's just say that it's totally free. So for example, my kids, I give them complete freedom. I don't arrange their marriages. And same with me, I had complete freedom. I don't have my marriage arranged. And yet, if you look statistically, maybe this is where the political scientists are good or the economists are good. If you look statistically at American life, we supposedly have complete freedom to marry whoever we want, right? However, if you look at this statistically, almost all people marry within their own social class. It's like 95% of marriages are going to be marriages of working class people to working class, middle class to middle class, or upper class to upper class. I don't know how many classes we have in the United States, but let's say we have those three, right? 95%, very rare that someone will stray out of their social class to get married. And as I tell my students, just try taking somebody home to dinner to your parents of a truly different social class and see how it works out. But how do we do that? How do we do that without explicitly telling people that you shouldn't marry someone who doesn't know how to hold a fork right? Because again, I didn't put any prohibitions on my children, and I probably haven't taught them how to hold a fork right. So, but how am I pretty sure that they're gonna probably marry somebody in their own social class? That's not an intangible, that's a tangible. That's a very tangible thing. So the first method is zip code. Because how are you gonna meet these people, right? And so, yes, our schools are as segregated almost as they were before Brown v. Board of Education, and they're also wealth segregated. In our country, if you've tried to buy a house recently, the prospect of home ownership, I hate to be sad and depressing about this, but the prospect that you will be able to buy a house is not looking very good these days. It's very hard to buy a house. And so it basically segregates by wealth, because where are you going to be able to live? And that is going to determine basically how much wealth you have is going to determine where you live. And then you're going to be living with the same kind of people who have the same level of wealth. And guess what? The property taxes are what fund the schools. And so in one place, you'll have a zip code where it's like totally wealthy people and they have high property taxes and great schools. And in another place, it's not looking so great. Now, nobody made a law, it's just the market sorting things out. So the first method is zip code. However, how was it that I, growing up in Montana, and my wife, growing up in New Jersey, got together? Those aren't the same zip codes.
Well, where did you meet?
Where did we meet? Exactly. Abby, where did we meet?
College.
College, exactly. And guess how colleges sort people? I know we don't have the SAT anymore, but it's still kind of there in the background. And SATs almost entirely correlate to wealth and school district. And so it's like, if you look at who the people are in all these colleges, First of all, who are the people who go to college? The people who don't go to college are probably going to be the working class in your town, right? The people who go to college are somehow striving to be in the middle or upper class. The colleges sort people out. And so the people you meet when those hormones are all firing off during college are probably going to be in your own social class. That's what I think Bourdieu is really useful for. But he's so confusing. He's almost as confusing as this math doing his symbolic systems. And I can't ever figure out if it's just because the French don't have enough words or if it's a bad translation. But it's like, this is where I go, oh, what is he talking about? Instruments of knowledge which exert a structuring power insofar as they are structured. Like that's the same word over and over. Or this one, the dominant class is the locus of a struggle for the hierarchy of the principles of hierarchization. What? Are you serious? Can that be? Like, is this just do we not have the right words in English to express what the French are saying? And so we have to use the same word twice? Or is it bad translation? Or is it bad French? I can't tell. I'm not a French speaker and I don't read this in the original, so I don't know. It kind of makes sense. Let's deal with that last part. The dominant class is the place of struggle for the hierarchy of the principles of hierarchization. So what he's saying is it's in this place where people are trying to promote the idea of hierarchy and that should be that we should all look up to them. And what he says here is sometimes those people, they hire people from the middle class to basically do the ideological work for them and to produce things and to do this symbolic system. In fact, I'm kind of part of that. They hired me, see, to inculcate into you the principle of hierarchy. I'm trying to fight, but it's hard because here you are in college, you need to live. What I find the most interesting from Pierre Bourdieu is this idea that when you look on, say, people debating on television, that there's opinion, this universe of opinion, there is heterodoxy and orthodoxy, and that's where you have debate and argument. And then what makes that debate possible is this larger idea of the universe of the undiscussed or the undisputed, which he talks about a little bit in this article, but not that very much. It's talking about where symbolic power comes in. A good example of this, as long as we're talking about getting married and who can get married, is the idea of same-sex marriage. So if you go back, say, let's go back 70 years into the 1950s. And I said, I ventured out with the idea of same-sex marriage. It wasn't even a debate, right? It's assumed that there's no such thing as that. It's not even in the realm of discourse. The doxa is heteronormativity, especially as the basis for marriage. If you wanted to do anything same sex, you were supposed to be married, but you did that on the side and hopefully in a hidden way, right? Then if you go into, say, the 1980s and 90s, all of a sudden same-sex marriage enters in, but as a heterodox opinion. That is, it was not orthodox. It was something that was seen as a kind of a protest or it was a challenge to the existing system. And even as late as, say, Barack Obama's presidency, he was still saying that, no, I don't agree with same-sex marriage. So it was part of debate, right? Then, for at least a brief moment in time, I'm not sure where we stand on this right now, but for a little while, at least among your generation, same-sex marriage became part of the doxa. It was just assumed that you should be able to do that. It wasn't even an argument. I don't know. Is it coming back in as an argument now? Does anybody argue against same-sex marriage in your lives? Is there anybody that would come in and say, I don't agree with same-sex marriage? Sadly, it seems to be coming back into the argument phase. One of the things that we assume is that nations should be nations. Actually, that's why I thought this article, the one by Begonia Artsaga, I don't know if you pronounce her name like that. She's actually was from the Basque region of Spain, I think. Most sad thing I found out is she did not live very long. Yeah,
22 years.
42 when she passed away. So she did some really interesting things. And she's talking here about the state power to imagine borders. And we talked a lot about this a little bit when we talked about those maps of the world, where you'd imagine these people as coming on maps and having different colors and erecting borders. This article was written even before everybody got revved up about borders and searching people more and more. But she's talking about here what she's drawing on Benedict Anderson's idea that a nation is an imagined community. It's this idea that we are a family of people that we never meet, right? And so what she says is how we need to understand how particular political imaginaries articulate with the symbolic universe of nationalism in order to account for its affective power. What she means by affective power here is affect, which is that emotional power, how it has a deep psychological power. And what she's saying is that's because it's related to these ideas of gender and family. And so when those people are going across the border into Northern Ireland, she talks about how Ireland has often considered itself to be the woman's body as a country, and that is projected onto this. And so what she says is that the affective power of nationalism resides in its unconscious connections to formations of desire. And this is hugely important for trying to understand. Everybody's revved up now about our border, right? United States-Mexico border. Everybody is just going crazy about it. Well, yeah, why don't we get revved up about the Canadians? That is a good point. I've always been opposed to them, but here they come. They're always coming over and just invading our land from Canada. Yeah, why is it that this happens? Why am I more revved up about a border that is 3,000 miles away than I'm about a border that is 100 miles, right? And so when I see these pictures on the news, I don't know, I kind of want to do the math. My feeling is even if all those people cross into the United States, all the people we're getting excited about, it's just going to be a tiny drop in the bucket, and I'm never going to see most of those people. So why do I get all excited about it and feel like, oh no, they're all going to get me? They're not coming to get me. Anyway, there's this idea, what she's saying is we have to, it's not just an imaginary abstract, it has this affect power that we feel in our bodies. We feel nationalist in our bodies. So I was looking at maps of, when you Google maps of Ireland, it's really funny. If you just looked at this map of Ireland, you'd think it was on the Eurail. If you can buy a Eurail Ireland pass, it's not even there. Look, it's missing. It's like there's ocean up there that you'd think that that was the end. That's not actually how the island is. The actual Ireland, it includes Northern Ireland, which doesn't belong to Ireland. It's in the UK. And so it's funny how some of these maps of Ireland don't even have that part because it's not their territory. But I think she's saying something really interesting about the Irish nation and nation state. And of course, PowerPoint, as soon as I put Irish nation in, has to give me all these clovers. Because of course, what she says at the end is the Irish nation state came into being on the condition of losing the 6 counties that form Northern Ireland. In order to become Ireland the country, they had to give up those 6 counties. This again was really interesting. From within the discourse of Irish nationalism, partition meant that the Irish nation came into being as a nation state on condition of negating its self-identity as nation. So you can have your country, you can have your nation state, but according to their world, like it's not fully a nation because that part is missing. And as you see on the map, it's missing from the map. It's not even there.